We are less than 24 hours away from a full slate of NFL Sunday, and I cannot wait. I cannot tell you how excited I am to be here with you guys talking about fantasy football. So obviously we went over the must start and sit week 1 fantasy football running backs earlier today. Now we need to go over the must start and sit wide receivers before week 1 fantasy football. We're running on limited time here, so we got to make sure we get this in a day before all of these NFL games on Sunday. So like we did earlier today, we're going to show you the chart that you can see on the screen right now. And in the chart, under the start and flex territory categories, these guys are in order in accordance with my rankings this week in fantasy football for week 1. So to start out with the first matchup, we've got the Bengals taking on the Browns in Cleveland this week. Obviously, you start Ja'Marr Chase. Ja'Marr Chase, you never put Ja'Marr Chase on your bench. He was a top 3 to 5 pick in most fantasy football drafts this year, depending on your format, of course, and depending on the size of your league. But Ja'Marr Chase, you never put him on the bench. I don't care what the matchup looks like. And the matchup is not exactly great. It doesn't matter. You still start Ja'Marr Chase. Amari Cooper, T. Higgins, still feel good about starting those guys as well. Amari Cooper is a clear wide receiver 1 in Cleveland now with a second year with Deshaun Watson. Full offseason under his belt with Deshaun. These guys are going to be much better in year 2 together. I think Amari Cooper is actually in line for a very good fantasy season this year, so I'm really big on getting someone like Amari Cooper. And T. Higgins, of course, you don't sit T. Higgins as well. He's always going to be in your lineup as long as he is active and hopefully playing in the games that he is active in, unlike last year. And then flex territory, these guys are really lower end guys, but you could start Elijah Moore or Tyler Boyd if you were really, really desperate. Like Elijah Moore is a guy that probably ends up being the wide receiver 2 in Cleveland. Maybe Donovan Peoples-Jones gets some of that work as well. I don't know. That's why they're really low-end flex guys. But I understand that some of you watching are in really, really deep leagues, or you just have like 18, 20-team leagues, and you have to really take some deep shots. I think Elijah Moore is a better deep shot than Tyler Boyd, but they're very close to me because Tyler Boyd, we all know that a couple games a year, he has some 20-point games. That's what Tyler Boyd does. I don't put it past him to have that type of a week this week. Now with the sit category, you sit Cedric Tillman, you sit Donovan Peoples-Jones. Just don't know what the workload of either of those guys will be. Not a big fan of Cedric Tillman as a player anyways. So moving down to our next matchup, I've got the Texans taking on the Ravens in Baltimore this week. Honestly, when you look at the start category, you're going to see that I have nobody as a clear starter in this category. I don't trust any of these wide receivers in this matchup. I think it's going to be a run-heavy game script for the Ravens because I believe they will get out really early and just beat the living crap out of the Houston Texans very, very early on in this game. So you've got guys like Nico Collins in flex territory because Houston will be in a negative game script that will force them to throw the ball. And Nico Collins looks like he's going to be the clear wide receiver 1 in this offense. You've got Robert Woods, but it's not really a thing where I'm worried about Robert Woods taking away Nico Collins' volume. Zay Flowers, I know everyone's high on him. I'm not starting him this week. I'm not telling my audience to start him this week. I don't know what the workload is going to be like for these wide receivers this week. I want to see things play out with this brand new Ravens offense that we've been promised all offseason before I put anybody in a Ravens wide receiver uniform in my start category. Same thing with Rashad Bateman. Same applies to him. And then you're going to sit guys like Tank Dell, Robert Woods, Odell Beckham. Tank Dell and Robert Woods, just don't believe that they're going to have as big of a workload. I think Tank Dell maybe could be interesting later on down the line, but we're not there yet. And then with Odell Beckham Jr., he's injured right now, but he is looking like he's going to start this week. Either way, it doesn't matter. I'm not playing Odell Beckham Jr., and I'm not telling my audience to play Odell Beckham Jr. Now, moving down to our next matchup, we've got the Buccaneers taking on the Vikings in Minnesota this week. You're going to start, obviously, Justin Jefferson. Who cares? Let's not even discuss it. It's a clear must-start type of guy. Flex territory, you've got guys like Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. And I'll be honest, I fought with myself on Mike Evans being in the start category. So Mike Evans is a very high-end flex option. Like, I definitely think that Mike Evans could be the one who actually does really well in fantasy this week for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The matchup favors him, and Baker favors him as a wide receiver as well. Because the one thing that saves Baker Mayfield's play is his deep balls. He throws a really good deep ball. He's not a precision guy, and that's why a guy like Chris Godwin, I've been telling people to stay away from in 2023 fantasy football. Chris Godwin kind of is on the higher end of middle tier as far as flex options go this week. He's still going to get volume because he's a good player, but I just don't think this is going to be a good matchup here for a guy like Chris Godwin. Not that the Vikings defense sucks, I just don't think that the matchup with Baker Mayfield and Chris Godwin together is a good pairing at all. And then Jordan Addison is in that same tier as Chris Godwin, where I think that Jordan Addison might have some big moments. I don't know if it's going to be week 1, but I do think that he will definitely be involved right out of the gate, because he is a pro-ready rookie. And then you sit guys like KJ Osborne, obviously. KJ Osborne should not sniff your matchup lineup unless there's an injury to Jordan Addison or Justin Jefferson. Now, moving down the list, we've got the Panthers taking on the Falcons in Atlanta this week. You start Drake London. I've had a lot of questions about Drake London this week in particular. I think you should absolutely start Drake London. He's the best weapon in this offense. And, listen, Atlanta's actually got some really good weapons now. Obviously, Bijan Robinson's going to be great for this team this year. Kyle Pitts is coming back healthy. I like Kyle Pitts a lot. But Drake London, I think, is going to be a great play this week. The matchup is not exactly bad, and I think that Atlanta is going to catch the Carolina Panthers really off guard, because I actually think that Atlanta is a dark horse to win this division this year. Drake London, to me, is a start guy this week. Flex territory, you've got your middle to lower tier guys like Adam Thielen and Mac Hollins. I'm not going to be looking to start Adam Thielen at all. But again, deeper leagues, I understand that you guys might need to make some moves and some really tough decisions here. So you might go with a guy like Adam Thielen. You might go with a guy like Mac Hollins. Not advising you to go either one of them, but I do think that in deeper territories, they do have some upside there in full PPR leagues. And then obviously you sit Jonathan Mingo. I'm not messing around with Jonathan Mingo in week 1. I've been out on him since before he was drafted. I've not liked Jonathan Mingo since he was drafted. So I'm not telling you guys to start Jonathan Mingo. If he comes out, has 10 targets this week, we'll reassess. But week 1, no way I'm telling you guys to even consider flexing Jonathan Mingo. Cardinals taking on the Commanders at Washington is my next matchup here. The only start guy I have here is Jahan Dotson. I really like Jahan Dotson this week. Jahan Dotson, I think, is going to be a very good player in week 1 right out of the gate against a Cardinals defense that is probably going to be one of the worst, if not the worst, in the league. I mean, not just the defense, but the team in general is just going to be so horrifically bad. So Jahan Dotson, I think, is a great low-key start this week for a lot of people who drafted him in the 9th round, the 10th round, the 8th round. Jahan Dotson, to me, very good start in week 1. Flex territory, I think Terry McLaurin is a high-end flex. I understand people are probably going to take issue with this because I know that there are Terry McLaurin truthers out there who love Terry McLaurin. I don't hate the guy. I just think that Jahan Dotson is going to be better in fantasy football this year than Terry McLaurin is. And I've said that several times this offseason. So I think that on the higher end, Terry McLaurin is a flex option. And I also think that Marquise Brown falls in that category as well, just because he's one of 2 functional pieces in this offense. James Conner, Hollywood Marquise Brown. Those are the 2 guys that the Arizona Cardinals have. So Marquise Brown is going to get peppered with targets. When Arizona gets down and they're going to have to make some decisions to throw the ball, Marquise Brown will get targets, so he's a target upside guy. Full PPR leagues, totally understand if you want to start Marquise Brown. I just wouldn't go out of my way to start him over a guy like a guy we talked about earlier, Mike Evans. I would definitely start over Marquise Brown. And then you sit the other 2 Cardinals wide receivers, Rondale Moore, Michael Wilson. I understand Michael Wilson's gotten a little bit of hype this offseason. I'm not starting either of these guys. The quarterback situation alone in Arizona looks like it's going to be a very, very bad situation. Now, dropping down to the next matchup, I've got the Jaguars going to Indianapolis to take on the Colts this week. You start the 2 Jacksonville wide receivers here. Christian Kirk, Calvin Ridley, I think they're both startable. I'm not a big fan of Calvin Ridley. Those of you who have watched this channel for many months now understand I am probably way lower than consensus and way more critical than consensus is towards Calvin Ridley. I'm not a huge fan, but I do acknowledge that the matchup here is good, and I do acknowledge that we don't know exactly who's going to be this wide receiver 1 in this offense. I still lean Christian Kirk, especially early, as Calvin Ridley tries to get back into a groove in the NFL because he hasn't played a full freaking season since 2020. But Christian Kirk as well, good matchup. I think this team, the only problem with them is that they get out to an early lead and then they keep that lead by running the ball. So I don't think that either of these guys has a super high ceiling this week, but they're both on one of the top 5 offenses in the NFL likely. Flex territory, I think Michael Pittman is a decent flex option. Honestly, I think he's a decently high flex option because, like I was just talking about, the game script is going to be against Indianapolis very early on. So Michael Pittman is going to come out there and probably get like 10 targets in this game. I think he's a high-end flex start guy. I just don't know what to expect with the first start of the year for Anthony Richardson. Anthony Richardson was wildly inaccurate in college. This guy is not a pro-ready prospect who is just going to come out swinging right away. I just don't believe that's on the table. And then I'm sitting guys like Zay Jones, Alec Pierce, Josh Downs. You can make an argument in really deep leagues that they might have some flex potential. I'm not going to do it though. Zay Jones, he's getting pushed down the depth chart because of Calvin Ridley addition. So I don't think that the targets are going to be there, especially since they will still be targeting a guy like Evan Ingram. And then Alec Pierce, Josh Downs, just don't think this offense has enough upside to really support those 2 other guys as a wide receiver that would be willing to flex in a particular week. Now moving down the list, 49ers going to Pittsburgh to take on the Pittsburgh Steelers right here. I've got one start guy, and it's probably a little bit weird to hear this say, but Deebo Samuel's the other guy that I would start. He's the only guy that I would start right here. Deebo Samuel, this is going to be a tough matchup here. I think this is going to be a very defense-heavy matchup right here where defense wins the day. And I think that Deebo Samuel can hit on a couple big plays. Listen, the Pittsburgh Steelers, their defense is not as good as some people are making it out to be. They've got an old but maybe Hall of Fame player in Patrick Peterson starting at corner right now, and they've got Levi Wallace, who's very unproven. A lot of people think I'm tough on the Steelers. I'm a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. I'm just a realist, and my fantasy football analysis comes way before what I am as a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. So I just think that Deebo Samuel does have potential in this matchup to hit a couple big games. That's why I do think that he's a good start option here. And then all of the other guys are in pretty high flex territory. Like Brandon Ayuk, I consider him to be in the high-end flex category because I know that Brandon Ayuk is going to get plenty of work in this offense this year as well. The workload doesn't scare me for Brandon Ayuk. What I have a problem with is maybe that I think that it's going to be some weeks that are going to be Deebo weeks and some weeks that are going to be Ayuk weeks. I'm leaning towards the Deebo type of week this week. And then Pickens, I also consider a high-end start. He's a big boom type of guy. He's a boomer bust guy that I prefer to draft in best ball, but I do have him. I actually don't think I have him in any redraft leagues, but it's not because I don't like him. I like the guy George Pickens is a lot. I've been really high on Pickens all offseason long, telling you guys to draft him. I think he's a really good big play type of guy in your flex category this week. And then Deontay Johnson, just because he probably will get like 10 targets, is definitely worthy in flex territory as well. And then you sit everybody else in this matchup right here. Now, dropping down to the next matchup, we've got the Titans taking on the Saints in New Orleans. Man, I cannot wait for this matchup for Chris Olave this week. I love the matchup for Chris Olave this week. Of course, you don't sit a guy like Olave when you drafted him in the 2nd round, the 3rd round, the 4th round. You're not going to sit Chris Olave ever, but this matchup in particular, I got really high expectations for Chris Olave in this matchup right here. Tennessee was dead last in passing yards allowed last year. I think Chris Olave is going to have a field day on this defense. And DeAndre Hopkins is a good low-end start as well, just because of a target perspective. He's going to handle a major amount of this team's target share, majority of the season, but especially week 1, as Treylon Burks continues to work his way back into the lineup with an injury. And I do think that, like, in flex territory, these guys are both on the lower end. And originally, I wanted to leave out Michael Thomas out of this list, but I knew that since I was putting in Treylon Burks, who was on a less pass-happy offense than New Orleans is, I knew I had to put Michael Thomas at the back here, also on this list as well. I think Treylon, just because I like the player more, is definitely more worthy of a flex play than Michael Thomas is. But Michael Thomas, in a matchup that's really good for him, I think this team passes a lot this week. He's fine. Very low-end flex type of option. And then you're going to sit everybody else in this matchup as well. Now moving down to the Raiders, taking on the Broncos in Denver. You start Devontae Adams. You never sit Devontae Adams. I understand there's concerns about him this year. You never sit Devontae Adams. You drafted him way too high for that type of behavior. And then flex guys, you've got a lot of guys in this category. I think if Jerry Jeudy starts, I'm willing to flex the guy. I'm not saying I'm preferring to flex him, but he is on the higher end of flex guys because I know if he starts, that means he's good enough to be the wide receiver 1. And that immediately puts him over Courtland Sutton because he's simply just a better player, probably at 75% than Courtland Sutton is. Maybe even half his speed. Like, I think that Jerry Jeudy, if he plays, I'd start him over Courtland Sutton any day. I think Courtland Sutton, if Jerry Jeudy doesn't play, he's worthy of a flex option here. But I do think that also a guy like Jacoby Myers, you could probably make the same argument for. Wide receiver 2, relatively decent contract this offseason for the Raiders. So I think that he's got his moments coming this year as well. I just don't know if it's going to be week 1. And then Marvin Mims, I know that I've told you guys to pick up Marvin Mims this week. And I do think that he has upside in this game. I'm not willing to say I'm going to start him though, especially if Jerry Jeudy plays. And that's what I'll assume here is that Jerry Jeudy doesn't play. If Jerry Jeudy doesn't play, I would say that maybe you could put Marvin Mims at the low end flex territory, which is where I originally wrestled with him. So I do think that as a low end flex guy, a very deep shot with maybe some high upside, you could accept Marvin Mims in your flex spot. I would just say I wouldn't be going out and looking for ways to put Marvin Mims in your lineup this week and sitting a guy who clearly is in a better situation. Eagles at Patriots, next matchup here. Start the 2 Eagles receivers, A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith. I've been on record several videos this week saying that I think this matchup is going to be very tough for the Eagles here. Doesn't change that you start both these guys every single time that they're out there. You absolutely start both of them. They probably won't have as high of a ceiling as they will in future weeks, but you never sit those guys. Juju Smith-Schuster, mid to low end flex territory for me. I understand that he's probably going to be the wide receiver 1 in this offense. I just don't think the offense is that good, and I think this is going to be a very run-heavy game script for the New England Patriots this week because I actually think this game is going to be closer than people think. And then Kendrick Bourne, you go ahead and sit him if you have him, and also everybody else in the matchup as well. Rams at Seahawks, next matchup here. Start DK Metcalf, start Tyler Lockett here. That's what I'll say about this matchup here. You start guys like DK because you drafted him high, and you start someone like Tyler Lockett because last year, he ripped up the Rams last year in fantasy football. Definitely worth a play here in this particular matchup. Flex territory, I'm looking at Jackson Smith-Njigba over Van Jefferson. Jackson Smith-Njigba cleared to go for this weekend. Not going to be limited either. So if I'm starting one of these guys, it's going to be Jackson Smith-Njigba because he's on the better offense and in the better matchup than Los Angeles is. Now you can make the argument to me that Van Jefferson is actually a decent start this week, and I would listen because I actually sort of agree. Van Jefferson, the only reason that it's actually a decent matchup is because I think they're going to get killed this weekend by the Seahawks. And I think Los Angeles is going to have to play a ton of catch up, and Van Jefferson with no Cooper Kupp is going to be the wide receiver 1 in this offense. So he could definitely see a 10 target type of game this week, which is why I'm totally fine if you flex him. I prefer Jackson Smith-Njigba as a player, and that's why I have him above Van Jefferson in this particular week 1 matchup where we haven't seen either of them play a regular season game in 2023 yet. And then you sit Puka Nacua, you sit Tutu Atwell, you sit Ben Skowronek. All of these guys you go ahead and sit right here. The matchup just isn't high enough, and we don't have enough information on who the real second option as far as targets go will be for Matt Stafford without Cooper Kupp. We'll get that information tomorrow and the next coming weeks because Cooper Kupp is likely going to miss a long time, but we don't know exactly yet, so I'm not advising anyone to start them. Dolphins and Chargers, next matchup here. Fireworks matchup. You light up all these guys. Tyreek Hill, Keenan Allen, Jalen Waddle, Mike Williams, all starts this week. This matchup is going to be absolute fireworks for fantasy football, and I cannot wait for it just as a pure NFL fan. But from a fantasy football perspective, obviously Tyreek Hill is always a high ceiling guy. Same with Jalen Waddle. Keenan Allen, this is going to be a great week for him as well. He's probably going to get peppered with like 13 targets this week. I really believe that. And Mike Williams, obviously, going to get a lot of targets this week as well. Big playability is always going to be there. You start someone like Mike Williams as well, just because the matchup is just so ridiculously great this week. Flex territory, I'm even willing to flex Joshua Palmer. I'm willing to do it, not preferring to do it, but he is in that middle tier of flex guys for me. Deeper leagues, I actually think he's a decent shot to play just because of the matchup. This matchup is ridiculous. Sit Quentin Johnston, sit Braxton Berrios, sit Cedric Wilson. Obviously, the 2 Dolphins receivers are no-brainers to sit, but Quentin Johnston, I know that a lot of people are excited about him. I've been saying stay away from him, but I know a lot of people have him. So for the people who do have him, this isn't going to be his week. He's listed as the wide receiver 4 on the depth chart behind Joshua Palmer. This team intends to bring him on slowly, and that's exactly what I predicted before the start of the season when I called Quentin Johnston a slow burn type of player in his first year in the NFL and possibly years to come. We'll start with week 1 though. Just go ahead and sit Quentin Johnston. Packers at Bears, next matchup. Start DJ Moore. DJ Moore is on the lower end of starts here, but he's a clear wide receiver 1 on an offense that will improve and with a quarterback that has improved by all accounts during this offseason. You go ahead and you start DJ Moore. Don't know how high the ceiling is. That's why this matchup is very fascinating to me to watch. But I would start him with confidence. And then obviously the Christian Watson injury shakes up a lot of things for the wide receivers in Green Bay. I think if Romeo Doubs plays, and he's injured by the way heading into the week with a questionable tag, I think if he plays, he's actually a decent option. I mean, this is a wide receiver that probably will see a wide receiver 1 duty this week in this offense. And if he doesn't play, Jayden Reed, I think, is a very viable option this week as well. Jayden Reed, second round rookie for the Green Bay Packers, in the slot right now. But if no Christian Watson and no Romeo Doubs is a reality for this team, Jayden Reed's going to have some targets, and he's definitely going to get a lot of work in this offense this week. So keep an eye on the situation as we get closer to game time. I'm sure you'll probably see some more by Saturday night, and definitely tomorrow morning on Sunday morning. But I think that the Packers receivers this week definitely have some upside. And Darnell Mooney, lower tier type of guy for me. Think he has upside though just because he's a good player and he's one of Justin Fields' favorite targets leading up to the acquisition of DJ Moore. And then you sit everybody else. Cowboys at Giants, the Sunday night game. Start CeeDee Lamb. Love the matchup for him this week. He was a top 5 wide receiver in my rankings this week for a reason. Never sit CeeDee Lamb anyways. Flex territory, a lot of these guys are mid to low end. Brandon Cooks, not sure what his role is going to exactly be. I would imagine he'll probably get like 5 to 6 targets, maybe 7 targets in this matchup, but I don't think that this is going to be one that I'm going to be willing to predict on a week-to-week basis until we see what happens in week 1. Brandon Cooks, middle end flex type of guy, not willing to go out and say that I'm willing to start him over a guy like Mike Evans though. Just don't think he's as good of a player these days as Mike Evans is. Isaiah Hodgins, Jalen Hyatt, just because they could both be the wide receiver 1 on this team, understandable if you want to take a shot on them. Deep shot, totally get this one. Isaiah Hodgins looking like he's probably the wide receiver 1 outside of Darren Waller, obviously. And that's the problem with these Giants wide receivers. The real wide receiver 1 in this offense looks like it's going to be Darren Waller. But Darren Waller also dealing with an injury as well. So keep that in mind. Think he's going to play as far as I've seen, but keep it in mind. So these Giants wide receivers could see some big games. And I think that Jalen Hyatt in specific maybe sees a big player or 2 in this game. Flex worthy, not going to go out and say to start them over some higher tier guys. They're in the lower tier flex categories. You sit everybody else in the matchup. Final matchup of the week, Bills at Jets on Monday night. You start Garrett Wilson, you start Stephon Diggs. Easy peasy lemon squeezy right here. Garrett Wilson, I've got him ranked exactly 1 spot higher than Stephon Diggs this week just because Stephon Diggs has to deal with Sauce Gardner. That's going to be a problem here. Still a great player, still a great guy to start. Never sit Stephon Diggs, but I prefer Garrett Wilson in this matchup because I think that Buffalo will have a tougher time keeping a lid on Garrett Wilson than the Jets will keeping a lid on Stephon Diggs. And that's what makes a guy like Gabe Davis in decent flex territory. I mean, he's a middle to high-end flex type of guy this week. Gabe Davis, I'm not going to go out of my way to put him in, but if I've got some injuries to a guy like Christian Watson, if I've got an injury to a guy like Jerry Jeudy, Gabe Davis is not a bad play here because he will see a lot of things opened up for him with Sauce Gardner all over a guy like Stephon Diggs this week. Gabe Davis is not bad. He's always got a big play threat to him. Gabe Davis is fine this week. Allen Lazard, lowered, not low, but middle end tier. I wouldn't go out of my way to start Allen Lazard, but I do think he has some upside because he's got the relationship with Rodgers. He likes Rodgers. Rodgers likes him. So he will have some targets in this game. It's always going to vary week to week, as it has always done in Allen Lazard's career. And then everybody else, you go ahead and sit. So let me know what questions that you were dealing with in your matchup this week for week 1 fantasy football. And I will go down in the comments and try to answer every single question that's thrown at me. And if you want to see the must start and sit wide receivers for week 1 fantasy football, click on this video right here.